This past weekend we finished our series, The Upside Down, where basically we live in the upside down. God created a world and it was perfect and it was incredible, and because of sin that came into the world was completely flipped upside down. But we have to, as Christians, bring back the world that God had originally intended for us to be in. And we talked in Matthew chapter 5 verses 10 through 12 this past Sunday, and we're talking about this idea of being persecuted. Whenever we're persecuted, whenever we're insulted, whenever we're mocked, we don't have to worry. We don't have to struggle. We don't have to be angry with that, because Jesus says that when we are insulted and mocked and persecuted in our faith, that we actually have a great reward in heaven. And it's important for us to realize that if we are ever made fun of, if we're ever mocked, if we're ever persecuted for believing in Jesus Christ, it is a good thing. It's not fun, it's not easy, but I promise you that it's worth it. I promise you that there is a reward that's going to come in heaven one day. And we may never see that here on earth. We may always be insulted. We may always be mocked. We may always be persecuted, but there is something better on the horizon. And it reminds me of a guy named Stephen in the book of Acts, where he was persecuted because of what he believed. He was doing incredible things. He was serving his community. He was serving widows and their families, and he was doing miracles and wonders and so many things, and he was persecuted for it. The people were so confused on why he was doing what he was doing, but he did whatever he could. He did whatever he could to serve people. But they started to accuse him. They started to say that he was a liar. They started to say that he wasn't who he said he was. And there's so much going on in this story. And they decide, you know what? We're going to be so mad at Stephen that we're going to drag him out of the city and we're going to stone him to death because he's doing things wrong. And that's what they do. Stephen prays this. He prays that God wouldn't hold this sin against the people. That God would not hold the sin of stoning them against the people. That's an incredible prayer as Stephen dies. And in this story, we see a man named Saul who approved of the killing of Stephen. A couple chapters later down the road, it talks about Saul destroying the church. And Saul destroys the church, but meets Jesus on the road. He stops him on the road and he says, "Saul, why are you destroying my church?" And a couple verses down the road and a couple chapters down the road, we see that Saul becomes Paul because he turns his life over to Jesus, and he goes from destroying churches to planting churches. We see Paul writing half of the New Testament. It's insane to see the story that can happen if we will just stand up for what we believe in. Because as Stephen was going to die through his stoning, through his persecution, through his martyrdom, Paul heard the prayers a couple chapters earlier. Paul's life changes. And I can imagine it started the day that he approved the killing of Stephen. But I wonder if he thought, why would he pray that? He's being killed. It must be real. So Paul goes on to write half the New Testament. He goes on to make an incredible life serving Jesus. He goes on to be persecuted himself and goes to jail for it. But Paul realized after he saw Stephen stand up for his faith, he was persecuted and mocked and insulted, but Paul saw what happened. And a little bit down the road, he changes his life. And I don't know about you, maybe you're insulted or maybe you're mocked or persecuted for your faith. You never know. The person that might be making fun of you now may come back to you here in a couple years, may come back to you in a couple days and say, you know what, I hate that I mocked you back then, but now I found Jesus, and it's because of the life that you lived then when people were making fun of you, when people were persecuting you. Make your life like Stephen's. Not that you ever go to death for your faith. Maybe that's a possibility. But just live a life not ashamed of your faith, but believing and acting on the things that you say you believe in. It's important. So the challenge here is look like Stephen. Stand up for what you believe in, because you never know who's going to see the life that you live and come to know Jesus, because it can make an impact, a huge impact in the world, just like it did through Paul's life. And we're still impacted through Paul's life today. So the challenge is look like Stephen. Stand up for what you believe in, because you never know what could happen. Your reward is in heaven.